Okay, we are going to do our best here. I did a research project for my content method analysis on how men are depicted in movies today. I covered 10 movies. I went over The Pacifier, Mrs. Doubtfire, Cheaper by the Dozen, Jungle to Jungle, a few Disney movies, and I tried to pick movies that were from a few different ages. So I did the 80s, the 90s, and then kind of today. So what was really interesting about this is that the data that I found was really unexpected, and I guess I didn't even really put out like a hypothesis of what I was going to find, but I did imagine that most guys were going to be really genderfied, yeah, and that we were going to see a lot of these like masculine dominant roles come out. And so I was really happy to see how this played out. It's really interesting. So I titled this Dad Days from the Movies. I can see how the dad role has changed and maybe how movies have influenced the way that men interact with their families based on the stereotypes. So here I visited the 1990s just as like a middle ground. So these movies were Robin Williams, Tim Allen, and we see here that in these movies, the dads are typically, and Jim Carrey. So those were kind of the top three of my favorites. I was a kid during the 90s. And so this concept of what the dads were like is very similar to what my dad was like. And I look at that now and I have a lot more compassion for my dad, because this is what the theater has created for our society to sort of reciprocate and use as data. My dad is from Australia, and so I think coming over to America and then raising a little girl as a single dad would have been an interesting challenge culturally, especially during that time. It wasn't very common for dads to be single parents, especially over little girls. It was very gender specific that you would, or sex kind of, I don't want to say sexist, but a little bit. We can see that in some of these movies where there's a lot of divorce. And so the family dynamic is being affected. And so that whole culture around men and then women progressing at that time, becoming more successful and being kind of the breadwinners, was a very reality-based theater script to be like consistently repeated in these films. And so as I went over that, I noticed this commonality that the dads are absent. They're really focused on their careers, where we see they're focused on the cars, the suits, the money. I got to do this business. I've got this. I got to be there at this meeting. I've got this boss to please and this client to take care of. And so the family goes to the wayside, and women at that time were becoming resistant towards that. Women were becoming more independent. And so this resulted in the courts really having a bias towards favoring mothers and really coming down hard on fathers. We do see a change in this in today's society now in the new millennium. And I can attest to that as a single mom, that dads are given a lot more grace, and they are given, well, in a lot of cases that I've seen, there's a lot more compassion and sympathy and flexibility. Whereas when we look in the 90s, these fathers are expected, men are expected to be able to do all of it, to take care of things in order to have custody of their children. So we see these dads like Robin Williams and Tim Allen and Jim Carrey, who are these comedians. They're funny and love to make people laugh. We all think it's really funny until it comes down to how they treat their wife and how they treat their child and how they treat their family life. And so men end up losing everything. The women keep the house, the women keep the kids, the women keep everything, and the women are, it's sort of victimized. And so the men therefore have to go through this big change. They need to become more compassionate, more emotional, more sympathetic to their families. And so we watch how they have to battle all of these systems in order to do that. So then I looked at today's dads, and today's dads are a lot more present. So I looked at movies with Mark Wahlberg, The Rock, who I think is amazing. And I decided to do The Pacifier with Vin Diesel, even though he's a nanny. I feel like that was still kind of something that was a little bit outside the box. That is kind of broadening this gender role of men, and that men can be nannies too. So I thought that that was pretty open-minded, and I really enjoyed that. But we still see this huge shift that instead of this dominant role like the 90s where men are business, suit, lawyer, rich, attractive, everybody wants them. Instead, we see this complete flip to today's men. Today's men are more involved in the family. They're very protective of their family. Everything is like, I will die for my family. I will do all of these action-packed scenarios and scenes in order to protect my family. And so family is very much the priority and becomes first. So we see this machismo masculine side come out in a different way, where men are really big and muscular and fighting and guns and all of this to protect the family. They're putting their women and the children first. They're putting their homes first. We're seeing this traditional style sort of come back where the dads are providing and the moms can stay home. And in these specific movies, everything that the men want is to leave this past behind and to be a family man. So a family man in today's society is more involved. There's a 50-50 equal relationship. And so we see these dads who are not very disciplinary. They love their kids, and they want to do everything to be the best kinds of dads and husbands, and they're more emotionally available. They're doing everything they can to connect, and that's how the whole story plays out. And so we see them still become heroic in a different way. So men are still very much heroes. Even in the 90s, we don't see where the moms are the heroes. The moms are very much the victims. And so in order for a dad to become a hero in those storylines, he has to change. And so his battle is between society and his career and his own self. Whereas in today's movies, we see he's fighting the world. He is trying to conquer the world, and he is willing to take everyone down and go through every kind of measure. One thing that really stood out in both of these eras was more like in Mrs. Doubtfire and more so in The Pacifier with Vin Diesel. We see this really specific, like, sexist kind of gender identification where the boys are meant to be boys and girls are meant to be girls. So in The Pacifier, we see girls are wearing like pink and blue or pink, and the boys are wearing blue, and the girls are in dresses and the boys are in flannel, and the boys have sports rooms and the girls have flowers and stuffed animals and very princessy. And so their activities kind of fall in line. Boys are in sports, girls are in dance. And it's very gender specific in that way, to cater to being a boy and being a girl. So there's a conflict in The Pacifier where the coach is saying this teenager wants to be in theater, and he's a boy and he needs a dad in his life, because only by having a dad would he be able to learn masculine, appropriate behavior. And therefore, because he doesn't have a dad, this is the reason he's going on the wrong path towards theater and art and singing and this other kind of talent, which we do see a lot more coming out in a more respectable way. So it looks like there's a page missing here. I did really enjoy looking very briefly at The Little Mermaid and Aladdin and some of like The Incredibles and going more into that. We see that back at that stage, it's more of this princess, and the dad is the king. He's the king of the kingdom. He's strong, he's powerful, he's controlling, and these daughters are wanting to break free. And that's very common there. Whereas then we skip again to the 90s and we see Cheaper by the Dozen, which is actually probably a little bit more earlier in the 2000s. And Steve Martin they've got a dozen kids, and the mom leaves to go pursue her career, and he's like, I got this, I'm going to do everything at the house, and chaos breaks out. So we see that chaos breaks out when the dad's in charge and when he's trying to figure out all of these more maternal roles by society. And so culture is really shaped by what's expected of men and this masculine energy that they have to portray in being the protector a provider, protecting through emotional protection, protecting physically. And so I just thought that was really interesting about how that played out for men. Thank you for your time.